welcome back to my Astro Imaging Journey channel. So, a couple episodes ago, we had the Q&A from Red Dadster, and we were talking about guiding. Well, today I want to go from my settings, as I have them in PHD2, and hopefully this is a supplement to that and would help anybody out that's having similar issues to Red Dadster. So the screen you see here, I don't believe this is the default layout. I have gone in and looked at the different view screens that you can look at, and this is what I like to use. So up here at the top panel, wow, I stuttered a little bit there, didn't I? So this is your history, and later on, right now it's daylight, it's rainy, I don't have my rig set up, so I can't actively connect to it, but I'll try to pull some old video later to display some of this and go over it from what was a live session in the past. But the top here is your history. It's your graph of what your guiding is looking like. Now, I like to use the 400 setting. That's 400 seconds, so this would be the x-axis at the bottom. Your y-axis plus or minus 16. A lot of people I see, tighten that down to look at 4 or 8, or I like to use 16 simply because there are those times when it is dithering, and if you're using a 4, it might drop below the 4, and you're wondering where it's at, and you got to wait for it to come back. So I just like to keep it at 16 and leave it be, since I usually don't actively look at it anyways, since SGP has the graph in a panel on the side. The settings here, I really don't change those much. I guess I could change it to like pixels or star mask or what have you, but I've just left them as default. Seems to work pretty well, and if you ever want to, you can clear it out. The trend lines, that would give you a straight line. As more data comes along, you're going to see a trend line straight. I believe it's orange or yellowish line. It says you're either going positive or negative on your RA and deck, and the closer it is to the middle, the better your guiding is. That's a little too OCD for what I want to look at as far as this is concerned. It is very helpful when you're looking at your polar alignment in PHD, but that's a completely separate screen and it's going to be on there by default anyway. So I just leave that one unchecked. Corrections, I like to see when it's doing the little RA and deck corrections. Deck would be red and RA is blue, because you get these little humps, looks like bar graphs, and let's just see how much it's trying to correct. And if something's off or what have you, or you're constantly seeing big spikes in those, then maybe it's time to change some settings. So, but you would think all of your stuff would be up here, but it really isn't. You would think there'd be a preferences or something up here like most programs in Windows have, but it's not there. It's actually this little brain icon here, advanced parameters. And this is where we set everything up. So for the most part, I'm set for default. Yes, automatically check for the updates. and only check for major releases. Okay, so the next thing is the log file location. Just put wherever you want to put those logs. I mean, it's as simple as that. Like any other software, if there's a problem and it does a log dump or a data dump, those are good info for the developers if you submit a support ticket. I don't enable diagnostic image logging unless I'm experiencing an issue, and then I'll go in and enable it, which I haven't had to do yet. The other settings, random or spiral. I prefer the spiral at this point. RA, well, I mean, yeah, we could just go RA, but why not do deck as well? Scale. I've never changed that. That's the default. Seems to work pretty well, so I've never had to change it. I'm going to assume that that is if something is trying to do a half step, but you need it to do a full step, then you would double it. So a scale of, well, I would assume 100% would be double. But, that's an assumption since I've never actually tested that. Next is the camera settings. So now we have, this is where, clearly certain things are grayed out here. So I guess if we go by a 2x2, no, I guess we can change them. A lot of times you can't change that if they're grayed out. The target SNR, I like to use 15. I usually get much higher than that, and 15 is, once clouds start coming in or having issues with seeing, then, or moonlight, 15 gets me to that threshold where if it's just small wispy clouds, then it can still track the star, but heavier clouds, obviously, it's going to go by the wayside, and sometimes you end up with some erroneous light. Maybe somebody pulled into the driveway, or there's moonlight out there, and that can bring up the noise level a little bit. Having a 15 keeps it just enough that unless somebody's shining a flashlight in that general direction, it's generally not a problem. So that's the minimum I like to go with. Obviously the camera's not connected, so we can't do any additional properties down here. However, the one that you are going to want to change is your pixel size. I'm not sure if I changed the camera gain or not, but the pixel size you'll need to go to the camera manufacturer to get, and that's in, what's that, nanometers or picometers, I'm not sure. It's a little italicized U, very small. Disconnect unresponsive camera after 30 seconds. So if you remember in one of the other videos I was talking about the error 22 issue I was having where the USB media converter was dropping out and I was losing connection to pretty much everything on the hub. Well, the Starshoot, the Orion Starshoot, would not auto-recover. So after 30 seconds, Windows still thinks it's disconnected, and PHD will disconnect the camera automatically. Other than that, I think I left everything pretty much default. Guiding, I believe most of these were default. Star mass detection, if I remember correctly, I enabled it and set it to 70. Obviously, we don't want 100%, but we also don't want it to be too tight as well. Focal length, you have to set that. That is based on your guide scope. So in my particular case, it's a 60 millimeter Orion scope with a focal length of 240. Works pretty well. And the calibration step is in milliseconds. We can calculate that based on the focal length, pixel size of the camera, and whatever other settings. I believe I left these default. And it says that the image arc seconds per pixel is 4.47 and that the calibration step should be 1.25 seconds or 1250 milliseconds. So make sure you calculate that based on the other parameters you set. I think the rest of these were default. I don't remember. Algorithms. If I remember on one of the videos I was watching, hysteresis was the option to select. I can't remember what was default, but they recommended hysteresis, and it's been working for me. And that's for RA, and then I can't remember. I don't think I changed this, so this might be default here as well. And then backlash compensation. If you know you have some backlash in there, you can do some tests and try to figure that out. I'm obviously not using it, so it's not something I'm familiar with. After that, click OK. Alright, after that, it's pretty much said and done. I believe, so the screen brightness, your gamma here, this only matters to this little view plane right here. It has no impact on the guiding whatsoever. It's just so that you can think of it as the ISO in a DSLR. You know, you bump it more of this to the right, it's going to be a black screen with pinpoint stars, and only the brightest stars are going to show up. So that would be like going to an ISO 100, and then if you move it all the way down here, it's going to be a grayish, grainy screen. You'll see more stars, and we would say that would be more like a ISO 6400 in the DSLR. So play with that to where you can see some of the stars, maybe get a little bit of the graininess, but mostly black, and leave that, just leave it there. Your exposure, now this is, I played with this and, mistakenly thinking that, I wanted to go, half a second because I wanted to be able to track sooner. And I was having issues, so I went longer and I went to 3 seconds, thinking, okay, let it drift a little bit. I'm only doing 1 minute exposures, and then let it try to track. And what I've found is on good seeing nights. So when we go to that website that has the cloud cover and the seeing conditions and moon interference and all that good stuff, if it says it's a 3 out of 5 average, I'll use 1.5 seconds. If it's good, 2 out of 5, then I'll use 1 second. I've never seen excellent, so maybe I would want to use half a second, but if the seeing conditions are 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, then yeah, I'm going to have to go a little bit longer exposures. Now, why do we do that? Because we don't want to chase the seeing. And maybe this is something Red Daster needs to look at tweaking as well, because he might be chasing seeing. He might have this tweaked down here a little bit too tight in the seeing conditions, that star's jumping around and is trying to compensate. So But generally, I'm at 1.5 or 1 second exposures on that. We have our connect the equipment. This is once it pops up pretty easily. Once you do your managed profiles, new using wizard, let's try that. So our guide camera we would select. In my particular case, oh looky there, determine the pixel size automatically. That would be great, but I don't have it connected right now. So if I did, it would populate, with the 4.46 or whatever it was. Have to manually input the focal length. What's my mount? Well, I know it's a Celestron CGM2. Normally I would say yes, but for now I'm going to go no. Let's go next. Adaptive optics device. I don't have an adaptive optics, so that's none. Then we give it a profile name. So as you can see here, here's my profile. That was the name I gave it. Starshoot Auto Guide on the CGM2. And then, now, if you saw in the setup video, there's an RJ11, for those of us that are a little bit older, a telephone connection that goes from the Starshoot over to the mount and plugs into the auto guided port. So we have the mount is on camera. So when we connect to all, it would connect to the auto guider, and then through the auto guider connect to the mount. You can't connect to the auto guider directly and then the mount after it's connected there, but connect to all works wonders. Works for me almost every single time, as long as the mount has power. So we're going to close that. So we would just do a connect and connect all. You'll see the status in the lower left here that it's connecting to everything, and then that screen will close once everything is connected. This little looping icon here will turn green, and you just click that and you should start seeing the stars appear. So once you start looping and start seeing the skies, then you can click this crosshairs here to begin guiding, and it will auto select a star if you haven't already. If you do select a star, you just click on it and then click guiding, and it'll start guiding. Clearly over here, the calibration is red, so we would, in this case, want to do a shift click to force the calibration. When it's calibrating, you'll see the step to the west, and then come back to the east, and then step to the north, come back to the south, and figure out the parameters for the mount accordingly. Once you have the mount up and running and calibrated, you can review the calibration data. And here's an old one here, and you want to see this nice perpendicular angle. It doesn't matter which quadrants it's going into. It could be down this way, it could be over here. As long as it's perpendicular, that is all that matters. And as you can see, the points are coming along the line pretty good. So, did 12 steps in deck, slew rate, RA slew rate, the camera angle. So, it finds all the good information that it needs to be able to track the stars so we can get some good images. Now, there is the guiding assistant, and what you don't see it here, but there's a couple parameters as far as I can't remember what they are right now, but they are. I'll point them out when I get the other video loaded up here. So what you would do is, obviously it's not connected, so it's not going to do anything, but you would click the start, and you're going to see the elapsed time field here start counting up. Give it 2 minutes. It basically stops tracking and lets the mount just do its thing. And then it'll find how much of a drift you have. And then based off of that, it's going to come up with some values, and then you can select over here, you can select which values you want to use, which will then populate the fields that will be here. So, which I'll show you here in a little bit. I like to do that, maybe once every couple weeks, just to make sure everything's still fine. But the only thing I really do via SGP mostly now is the calibration. Once it switches target, let it redo a calibration and let it rock and roll. Darks. I know I said flats in the Q&A. I apologize for that. We need a dark library. So if the camera was connected, we'd be able to go into, I believe, here into on the dark library, leave the lens cap on, or the little cover on the scope, and just let it take a bunch of images, and it'll build that dark library to be able to determine where its hot pixels are, so it doesn't auto-select them thinking that they're stars, because then it's going to be trying to guide on a pixel that's static, which means it's not going to guide at all. Outside of that, our guide statistics, good information, but again, I'm not sitting here watching it unless I'm having issues. Your star profiler, so when it selects a star on the left, this is a zoomed in version of that star, and you'll have a little X where it thinks the center of the star is, and then the target. So when a star is, so far off of RA and DEC, it starts plotting this. And you'll see it better in the other video, but you can see how tight it's keeping it, or how loose the guiding is getting. And then, you might want to tweak a few things based on that. So with that, I'm going to try and load up the previous videos and see if I can point some of this stuff out to you. Okay, so rather than trying to edit all the videos and everything, I just grabbed a couple screenshots, and I'll try to zoom in on the areas I'm discussing. So bear with me for a little bit, and we'll go over some of the stuff I promised you. Okay, so as we have here, the tracking is horrible in the top panel. Well, it looks horrible anyways. That's because I have the scale set to ±4. Like I said before, I normally like to use 16, but in this video I was at 4. And also you can see those values that I was discussing RA, hysteresis, min motion, um, declination values, all those good things. So those are the ones that when you do that guiding assistant, you can auto-populate these things once it calculates. So you can tweak them yourself, but for now, I just like to use the guiding assistant and let it auto-populate, and we go from there. Okay, so down here in the lower left, we have our start field. As you can see, I have the gamma slider all the way to the right, which means only the brightest stars are going to show up. And if you look in the field, they look kind of faint actually. It wasn't until later that I figured out you can adjust that and it doesn't impact anything. I also have this set to a 1 second exposure. This could have been a bad seeing night, so the stars are jumping around a little bit and that could affect its tracking of. There's not much else in this panel to pay attention to as far as I'm concerned. Just making sure the stars are there and it's auto-selecting a decent star. Not the dimmest, not the brightest, but something in the middle. Our next item up for grabs is that zoomed in version of the star. The panel is the star profile. Gives you a nice little histogram with showing the peak, the full width. Actually, that looks to be half full duplex. You know, it just lets you see what it's doing, what the star looks like, and the value it's trying to keep, I believe, at the lowest. So 6.07 is not too terrible. Last panel to view is the target panel. Now you'll see that I have it set for 100 seconds. I've soon moved that up to 400. But as you can see, there's a bunch of white dots. Maybe they're a little bit bluish. But those are, every time it takes an image, it plots where that is. So it's a good representation to see how your tracking is going. The more dots you have towards the center of the crosshairs, the best your tracking is doing. In this particular case, you can see the dots are all over the place, so the tracking just not that great today. Again, I think this was a bad seeing night, so I had things tweaked a little bit too tight. I was chasing that scene. That's something we just don't want to do. Finally, when we were looking at that SNR setting and the configuration, if you look at the lower left of this image, you'll see the SNR value. Right now it's 90. Well, a 15, which is where I have it configured for now, gives us plenty of room for that to get a little bit faint or what have you. Again, wispy clouds will draw that down, moonlight, various things. So this just gives us a little bit of headroom to be able to track effectively, but not so low that we're going to be trying to track when the signal's just too low. And here we have that guiding assistant we discussed. As you can see, I let it go for 120 seconds, 2 minutes. Has a bunch of motion data, and it calculated that the RA min move setting should be 0.2, as well as the deck min move should be 0.25. So you can apply those from that panel, and hopefully everything goes smoothly after you do that. You also have a little checkbox in the lower left, measure declination backlash. That can take a little while, so it's not a bad idea to do it, but if you're in a hurry, don't check mark it. That can add 5, sometimes 10 or 15 minutes. So that's entirely up to you. And with that, thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Clear skies. See you in the next video. Thank you.